This is Colin O'Keefe for LXBN TV, and today we are talking about Major League Baseball player Ryan Braun, his New Year's suspension for supposedly testing positive for performance-enhancing drugs, and the importance of the appeals process. Joining me is Joe Bahgat of Bahgat Law LLC and the Sports and Entertainment Law Playbook. Starting off, Joe, for those who don't know or aren't familiar with what's going on here, what exactly happened with Ryan Braun and the ensuing appeal there?
Well, basically, since Major League Baseball implemented their, really harsh, stringent policy against performance-enhancing drugs, they can test anybody, anytime, in season, off season. And what happened was they came in during the playoffs last year, and they tested Ryan Braun after a game. It was a Saturday night, I believe. He gave the sample, and it came back positive. So, there's really no ifs, ands, or buts. There's automatic suspension, 50 games. Well, there is a process for appeal. It seems like it's in vain because nobody's ever been successful with it before. But in this case, what we found out was the gentleman that took the sample from Ryan Braun, the urine sample, if you will, he was supposed to package it some way and overnight it to a lab in Montreal, Canada, and that's the place, the designated lab that is supposed to do this for Major League Baseball. Well, he didn't get the sample to the lab. He went home and put it in his refrigerator. So he left it in his refrigerator, and he didn't get around to sending it until Monday. Presumably, it got to Montreal on Tuesday. Mm-hmm. Well, you've got, several days gone past here, and, a urine sample is not really good past a couple of hours as far as, its clinical significance.
Yeah, it's just, it was a weird thing that happened there. They've said, well, how can testosterone just automatically form in a test just sitting in someone's fridge? It's like, well, that's not the rules. The rules are that, by everyone who does drug testing, this is the amount of time that urine samples are valid for, and that, that's just the way it played out. But second, looking at the appeals process at play here, how does the appeals process in Major League Baseball compare to the appeals process in our legal system? What are the differences there?
Right. Well, it's in a lot of ways it's the same, but yet very different at the same time. In baseball, what we have here is it's a three-person arbitration panel, appeals arbitration panel, that presides over and hears the evidence, and they make their decision. Well, the three members of the panel are it's Rob Manfred, who is Executive Vice President of Major League Baseball, mm-hmm. and then the Executive Director of the MLBPA, and then a third, neutral, so-called neutral party. So how it's been is, the Manfred always says, guilty, mm-hmm. and the Players Association says not guilty, and it's been going where the third arbitrator, has gone in, with Major League Baseball, and in this case he went the other way, and that's why Rob Manfred got pissed, mm-hmm. And he put that statement out, and I thought it was unprofessional, if you ask me. I mean, he's a lawyer; he's supposed to act a certain way, and he violated so many of the canons by saying what he said. Mm-hmm. So in any event, that compares to our justice system, our appeal system. For example, if you appeal appeal a decision from a federal court, a trial court, and I'm just going to use the federal courts because they're the same everywhere. Mm-hmm. A lot of state courts are the same way. As far as you get a three-judge panel, and so you appeal the trial court's decision to the U.S. Court of Appeals for whatever your circuit is. If you're in Seattle, you're in the Ninth Circuit. So, and the three judges hear the case, hear the evidence. You submit briefs, or your lawyer does, and and then you go. Sometimes they argue the case, both sides, and somebody makes a decision.
Yeah.
So That's pretty much it.
Yeah, I mean, you see it. I mean, in our justice system, you see appeals, moving along and being, successful, much more likely than in baseball. I think you mentioned this. This is the first time in baseball that anybody, at the major league level has ever won a successful appeal. So I mean, when he got this handed down, it was the MVP. He's tested positive. He's going to appeal, but everyone basically was like, well, that doesn't matter. Nobody has ever won any of these things ever, and that was, I think, a source of contention after the appeal was upheld was that. During this process, everyone's been crying for, and I think you wrote about this as well, is everyone's been crying for drug testing for years, for decades. Or maybe not decades, but for 15 years. And then finally, we have a system, and then we have a player test positive for performance enhancing drugs, and there's a full system in place, and people don't want to trust the system. They just want to say, well, no, he got off on a technicality. We can't trust the system. But going back, finally, you wrote about this as well. Why are appeals so critical in situations like this, in Ryan Braun's situation, and then in our justice system as well?
Well, before I answer that, I kind of feel like I have to give you a little background. There's two types of appeals, at least in the law. Mm-hmm. You've got error correction on the one hand, and then you've got so-called policy challenges, constitutional. They call that judicial review, and that would be when you're going to the highest court of your jurisdiction, for example, the United States Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. When you go to the United States Supreme Court, you're not going to them and saying, this lower court messed up, mm-hmm. because they don't hear those cases. They take 80, 90 cases a year from all the cases. They want to know about, what policy is wrong. Why has the Constitution been infringed, or the rights been infringed? Mm-hmm. In this case, we're talking about the other way, and that's error correction.
Yeah.
And that's the majority of appeals. You're going to the appellate court, the appellate tribunal, and you're saying, this lower court screwed up, here's why, and this is what you should do about it. You should reverse the decision. Mm-hmm. Well, here you had a clear error in what's called chain of custody, which is very, very critical, especially in criminal prosecutions. They have to preserve the evidence. They have to, catalog it. Every person that touched it has to be, logged and verified, and the whereabouts of the evidence has to be accounted for at all times, from the time that it was collected until the time that it's, introduced as evidence, or in this case, tested at the laboratory. Mm-hmm. And clearly, there was a problem with that chain of custody here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's just if there aren't processes in place, and if those processes aren't being upheld, then you can't trust the results, and that's just how it works. So then that's how this played out, and it's kind of a feel-good story. You didn't get off on a technicality. This is just how this works, and it's kind of nice that our NL MVP isn't testing positive for steroids right now.
That's right.
Once again, that was Joe Bahgat of Bahgat Law LLC and the Sports and Entertainment Law Playbook. For more on this story, be sure to visit sportsandentertainmentlawplaybook.com and, of course, lxbn.lexblog.com. Thank you, Joe.
Hey, thanks, Colin.